A 7-year-old girl stands alone in a frozen park at dusk. Fog rolls off the river like something alive, and a man she's seen 6 times in 2 weeks is walking straight toward her through the mist, patient, calm, smiling, the kind of smile that never reaches his eyes. She has nowhere to go. No one who believes her, no one who listened. The only figure between her and the dark is a 6'4" biker covered in scars, sitting beneath a dead tree with a cigarette burning between tattooed knuckles and a Harley idling beside him like a sleeping predator. She doesn't run away from him. She runs toward him. And what happens next will shatter everything you think you know about who the real monsters are, and who becomes a guardian when the entire world looks the other way. If this story hits you, stay until the very end. Drop a like, leave a comment, tell us what city you're watching from tonight, because this ride doesn't stop until justice is done. The river smelled like rust and dead winter. Creed Hollow hadn't moved from the bench in 47 minutes. He knew because he'd been counting. Counting was something they taught you in the VA psych ward. Not the official curriculum, but the underground one. The survival tricks whispered between men who couldn't sleep and couldn't explain why the ceiling fan sounded like rotor blades at 3 in the morning. Count the seconds. Count your breaths. Count anything at all so the memories don't eat you alive before sunrise. He sat beneath a leafless oak at the edge of Ridley Park, a forgotten rectangle of cracked asphalt and rusted playground equipment pressed between the Caro River and a row of shuttered warehouses. The bench was splintered. The street lamp above him buzzed and flickered like a dying insect. His Harley, a blacked-out dyno with a cracked headlight and electrical tape holding the left mirror, sat 3 feet away, engine ticking as it cooled. Creed pulled smoke into his lungs and held it there. 43 years old, divorced, estranged from his only daughter. 3 combat tours as an army medic. 2 years in county on an aggravated assault charge he didn't contest because the man he hit deserved every broken bone, and Creed was too tired to argue with lawyers. A leather cut draped over shoulders that hadn't relaxed since 2009, bearing a patch that read, Iron Saints MC across the back in faded silver thread. He was not a good man. He knew this the way you know the weather, not because someone told you, but because you stepped outside and felt it on your skin. The park was empty. The temperature had dropped below 20. Sleet fell sideways, turning the playground into a glittering cage of frozen metal. Nobody came to Ridley Park after dark. Not families, not joggers, not even the dealers who used to work the east corner until the city cut the streetlights and the shadows swallowed the trade whole. Nobody came here. Except tonight, a little girl did. She appeared at the far end of the gravel path like a ghost. Small, maybe 7, bundled in a pink coat 2 sizes too big with the hood pulled up so only her eyes showed. She walked fast. Not running, but the kind of walking that children do when they're trying very hard not to run, because running means admitting something is wrong, and admitting something is wrong means no one will believe you anyway. Creed watched her cross the playground toward the swings. She sat on the middle one, gripped the frozen chains with bare hands, and didn't move. He looked past her toward the parking lot entrance. A man stood at the edge of the fog. Creed's cigarette stopped halfway to his mouth. The man wore a faded blue trucker cap pulled low, a canvas jacket, work boots. Average height, average build. The kind of man you'd never look at twice in a gas station or a grocery line. He stood perfectly still at the mouth of the gravel path, hands in his pockets, watching the girl on the swings with a patience that made Creed's blood slow to ice. There's a difference between watching and hunting. Creed had spent 2 decades learning that difference, first in Kandahar, then in county, then in rooms he'd rather forget. You learn to read the geometry of violence, the angle of a shoulder, the slight forward lean of weight shifting to the balls of the feet, the stillness that isn't calm but calculation. This man was calculating. The girl hadn't turned around, but she knew. Creed could see it in the rigid line of her spine, the way her small fingers whitened on the chains, the way her breath came in short, visible bursts like a trapped animal trying to decide which direction held the least amount of teeth. Creed crushed the cigarette under his boot and stood up. He didn't stand up fast. He stood up the way a loaded weapon gets raised, slow, deliberate, with the kind of mechanical certainty that makes the air change pressure in a room. 6'4", 240 pounds, shaved head, a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, from a piece of shrapnel that the field surgeon said should have killed him. Hands the size of catcher's mitts, knuckles tattooed with letters so faded they looked like bruises. The man in the blue cap saw him and stopped. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The sleet fell. The street lamp buzzed. Somewhere across the river, a freight train moaned through the frozen dark. Then the man turned and walked back into the fog. Not running, not panicking, just recalculating. That was the part that made Creed's stomach turn. A scared man runs, a startled man flinches, but a man who simply adjusts his route like a driver rerouting around a traffic jam, that man has done this before, many times. He's patient because he knows there will always be another opportunity, another park, another frozen evening when the world isn't watching. Creed looked down. The girl was standing right beside him. He hadn't heard her leave the swings, hadn't heard her footsteps on the gravel. She'd crossed 20 feet of frozen ground without making a sound, the way children learn to move in houses where noise brings consequences. She was shaking, not from the cold. Her hand found his, Dick. Two tiny frozen fingers wrapping around his scarred index finger like it was the last solid thing in the universe. And she looked up at him with eyes that held more knowledge than any child should carry and whispered, "He's gonna take me." 3 words. 3 words. And Creed Hollow felt something crack open inside his chest that he'd spent 15 years sealing shut with whiskey and distance and the deafening roar of a motorcycle engine at 2 a.m. on highways that led nowhere. He knelt down, eye level. His knees popped against the frozen ground. Up close, he could see that her lips were blue. Not from cold, from terror. The kind of terror that becomes so familiar it starts to look like a permanent feature of a child's face, like freckles or a birthmark. "What's your name?" he said. His voice came out like gravel dragged over concrete. "Ellie." "Ellie what?" "Ellie Mercer." "Where are your parents, Ellie Mercer?" She pointed toward the far side of the park, past the dead fountain and the chained-up restroom building, toward a dim yellow glow that Creed recognized as the window of the Riverside Community Center, a sad concrete box where the city ran after-school programs and weekend craft sessions for families too broke to afford anything better. "They're inside," Ellie said. "They told me to play outside for 10 minutes. "In this weather?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Creed had grown up in houses where children were sent outside in weather like this. It didn't mean the parents were monsters. It meant they were overwhelmed, distracted, stretched so thin that 10 minutes of silence felt like oxygen. But 10 minutes of silence in a place like this, on a night like this, with a man like that, 10 minutes could be a lifetime. Or the end of one. "How many times have you seen him?" Creed asked. Ellie's eyes widened. Not because the question scared her, because it was the first time an adult had asked it. 6, she said, maybe 7, outside school, at the store, twice near the bus stop on Kramer Street. She paused. "I told my mom. She said I was making it up." "You told your teacher?" "She said I have anxiety. She gave me a breathing card." A breathing card. Creed felt the old anger, the familiar bone-deep fury that had gotten him locked up, divorced, and exiled from his own daughter's life, begin to stir in the basement of his ribs like something waking from hibernation. He looked toward the fog where the man had disappeared. Gone. For now. "You stay right here," Creed said. He pulled out his phone, a cracked Samsung held together with a rubber band, and dialed the only number that mattered. It rang twice. "Yeah." The voice on the other end was flat, tired, and carried the permanent rasp of a man who'd smoked since he was 14. "Deacon, it's Creed." "I know who it is. It's 11 at night. What?" "I need a trace on a white male, 5'10", blue trucker cap, canvas jacket, work boots. Spotted surveilling a minor at Ridley Park, east side by the river." Silence. Then, "How sure are you?" "The kid's standing next to me shaking like a leaf in December and she says he's been following her for weeks. Nobody listened. I'm listening." More silence. Creed could hear Deacon breathing, could hear the faint sound of a television in the background and someone, probably his wife, Maria, asking who was calling this late. "I'll make some calls," Deacon said. Don't do anything stupid." "I'm standing in Ridley Park at 11 o'clock on a Saturday in 20-degree weather with a 7-year-old I just met. Everything about this is stupid. I mean, don't do anything that gets us on the news. No promises." He hung up. Ellie was still holding his finger. Creed walked her across the park to the community center, his boots crunching through frozen gravel, his cut stiff with cold, the weight of the girl's trust pressing against him like a physical force he didn't know how to carry. Inside, the center smelled like burnt coffee and wet carpet. A cluster of parents sat on folding chairs around a table covered in construction paper and glue sticks. A woman in a fleece pullover was leading some kind of holiday craft activity, her voice too bright, her smile too wide. The way people smile when they're being paid $9 an hour to pretend everything is fine. Ellie's parents sat in the corner. Von Mercer was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the hollow look of someone working two jobs and sleeping through neither. His wife, Dana, had dark circles under her eyes so deep they looked tattooed. Between them sat a diaper bag, a sippy cup, and a baby asleep in a car seat. Ellie's younger brother, maybe a year old, cheeks flushed with the overheated room. They looked up when Creed walked in. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of interrupted conversation. The heavy chemical quiet of fear. Every parent in that room saw the same thing, a giant, scarred biker in a leather cut with a skull patch and engine grease on his hands, leading their community's child by the finger. Dana stood up fast. "Ellie, come here, now." Ellie didn't move. "Ma'am," Creed said, keeping his voice low and even. "Your daughter was alone in the park. There was a man watching her." "Excuse me? Who are you?" "Nobody important, but the man outside your park is." Ben Mercer stepped forward. "We didn't ask for— Are you with a gang? Why is my daughter holding your hand?" Creed looked at Ben for a long moment. He recognized the fear. He'd seen it 1,000 times, in combat zones, in courtrooms, in the eyes of his ex-wife the last time she changed the locks. Fear makes people aggressive. Fear makes people stupid. Fear is the most dangerous thing in any room, worse than any weapon, because it rewrites the story before the facts arrive. "I'm not with a gang," Creed said. "I'm with a motorcycle club. There's a difference, but I don't have time to explain it right now. Your daughter says a man in a blue cap has been following her for weeks. She says she told you. She says nobody believed her." Dana's face changed. It was subtle, a flicker behind the eyes, a micro flinch of recognition, the look of someone who suddenly remembers the thing they chose to forget, because remembering it meant the world was more dangerous than they could afford to believe. "She has anxiety," Dana said, but her voice had lost its edge. "The school counselor said—" "The school counselor wasn't in that park 5 minutes ago watching a grown man walk toward your kid through the fog like he had all the time in the world." The room was very still. The craft leader had stopped smiling. Two fathers near the window exchanged glances. The baby in the car seat stirred, made a soft sound, settled. Ben Mercer removed his glasses and pressed his fingers into his eyes. "We should call the police." "Yeah," Creed said. "You should." He turned to leave. Ellie's hand tightened on his finger. "Don't go," she said. 2 words that hit harder than any bullet fragment ever had. Creed knelt down again. His knees ached, his back ached. Everything ached, all the time, and he'd stopped noticing years ago the way you stop noticing the sound of traffic when you live near a highway. "I'll be outside," he said. "Right outside." "Promise?" He hesitated. Creed Hollow had broken every promise he'd ever made. To his country. To his wife. To his daughter, Ava, who was 19 now and hadn't answered his calls in 3 years. Promising things to children was something he'd stopped doing because the wreckage of broken promises was worse than the silence of never making them. But Ellie was looking at him the way drowning people look at shorelines. "Promise," he said. He walked outside into the sleet and stood beside his Harley and waited. 20 minutes later, a single patrol car rolled into the lot. One officer, young, maybe 25, with a clipboard and the bored expression of someone responding to a call he'd already categorized as nothing. Creed watched from the shadows as the officer went inside. He could hear fragments through the propped door. Dana's voice, shaky now. Ben repeating the description. The officer's pen scratching on paper with the enthusiasm of a man filling out a parking ticket. The officer came back out 12 minutes later. Creed stepped into the light. "What's the play?" he asked. The officer startled, hand going to his belt. Then he saw the cut, the bike, the size of the man in front of him, and his posture shifted from surprise to practiced hostility. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "The girl grabbed my hand and told me a man was going to take her. That concerns me." We'll file a report. If the individual is identified, we'll follow up. Follow up, meaning what? Meaning we'll follow up, sir. I'd suggest you go home. The officer got in his car and left. Creed stood in the empty parking lot, sleet collecting on his shoulders, and stared at the taillights disappearing down River Road. One report, one clipboard, one board officer who'd forget Ellie Mercer's name before he finished his shift coffee. He pulled out his phone again. Deacon. Already working on it. He got two guys pulling camera footage from the gas station on Kramer. Buckshot's checking the motel registries along Route 9. And I called Mercy. She's got a contact at the state database who owes her a favor. How fast? Fast as it gets when you're doing law enforcement's job for free at midnight. What did the cops say? They'll follow up. Deacon laughed. It was not a happy sound. Of course they will. I'm staying at the park tonight. In 20-degree weather. I've slept in worse. Creed. Deacon's voice dropped half a register. What's going on with you? You sound different. Creed looked through the community center window. Inside, he could see Ellie sitting on her mother's lap, face buried in Dana's neck, small body still trembling. The craft leader was handing out hot chocolate. The fluorescent lights made everyone look exhausted and slightly green, like passengers on a ship that was taking on water. She ran to me, Deacon. Out of everyone in that park, and I was the scariest thing in it, she ran to me. Kids are smarter than we think. No, kids are more desperate than we admit. He hung up and leaned against his Harley. The engine metal was cold now, all the heat gone, and the bike felt like what it was. A machine, nothing more, nothing less. Not therapy. Not freedom. Not the answer to anything. Just a machine that moved you from one place to another while the noise drowned out the thing living in your chest that you couldn't name and couldn't kill. Creed stayed. He stayed while the families filed out of the community center in clusters, casting nervous glances at the biker standing alone in the sleet. He stayed while Ben Mercer loaded his family into a dented Subaru, Dana clutching the baby, Ellie's face pressed against the rear window, watching Creed with eyes that didn't blink. He stayed while the last lights went out and the parking lot returned to darkness and the river made its ancient, indifferent sound against the frozen banks. He stayed for 3 hours. At 2:14 a.m., his phone buzzed. A text from Deacon. No words. Just a photograph. A mugshot. The man in the blue cap stared back at him from the cracked screen. Same hollow cheeks, same deadwater eyes, same trucker cap slightly tilted to the left like a signature. Below the photo, a name and a string of numbers that Creed recognized as a federal warrant ID. Nolan Griggs. Age 41. Last known address, transient. Wanted in 3 states for offenses against minors that Creed couldn't finish reading because his hands started shaking and he had to put the phone face down on the fuel tank and breathe the way they taught you in the ward. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, until the red behind his eyes dimmed enough for him to see straight. 3 states. Multiple victims. Active warrants. And tonight, he'd been 20 feet from Ellie Mercer in a park where the streetlights barely worked, and the nearest patrol car was a clipboard and a shrug. Creed picked up the phone again and opened the Iron Saints group thread. A chain of numbers with no names, no profile pictures, no history, older than 72 hours because Deacon purged it like clockwork. He typed 4 words, full call, Ridley Park, dawn. Within 90 seconds, the thread exploded. 43 responses. Then 60. Then 90. Creed didn't read them. He didn't need to. He knew what they said because he knew these men, every fractured, haunted, scarred one of them. And he knew that somewhere in this frozen city, riders were already pulling on boots, zipping cuts over thermal layers, and walking toward garages where chrome machines waited in the dark, like wolves who'd just caught the scent. He kicked the Harley to life. The engine cracked the silence of Ridley Park like a gunshot, and the sound rolled across the Black River and echoed off the warehouse walls, and disappeared into the frozen sky. Creed pulled onto River Road, sleet stinging his face, the headlight cutting a pale tunnel through the fog. Behind him, the park went dark. But somewhere in this city, Nolan Griggs was still awake, still patient, still calculating his next approach to a 7-year-old girl who had no idea that the only thing standing between her and the worst night of her life was a broken man on a motorcycle who just made a promise he had no idea how to keep, and an army of ghosts that hadn't been called to war in a very long time. By dawn, they would be everywhere. But Creed didn't know yet what Deacon would uncover in the next 12 hours. A second photograph hidden in Nolan Griggs's motel room, pinned to a corkboard alongside 6 others. 6 children, all from the same county, all still alive, and Ellie Mercer's face was circled in red. The motel room smelled like mildew and gasoline. Deacon stood in the doorway of room 14 at the Clover Lane Motor Lodge, a sagging 2-story structure on the outskirts of the county where Route 9 bent south toward the river and the streetlights gave up trying. Behind him, the parking lot was a graveyard of cracked asphalt and frozen puddles, reflecting the red vacancy sign that hadn't been turned off in 6 years because the place was always vacant and always would be. He hadn't slept. None of them had. It was 6:47 a.m., and the sky was the color of old concrete, and the temperature had dropped another 8 degrees since midnight, and 23 Iron Saints bikes lined the road outside like a chrome barricade, engines off, riders standing in clusters of 2 and 3, breath rising in white columns, nobody speaking because there was nothing to say that the cold and the silence weren't already saying louder. Deacon held up his phone so Creed could see the photograph. "Buckshot found this taped inside the bathroom vent," he said. "Motel manager let us in after Mercy convinced him it was in his best interest. Don't ask how she convinced him." Creed took the phone. The image was a corkboard, the kind you buy at a dollar store, flimsy, brown, edges peeling. Pinned to it were 7 photographs, school portraits, all of them. The manufactured smiles, the fake sky blue backgrounds, the slightly crooked collars that parents try to fix in the car and never quite manage. 7 children. 4 girls, 3 boys. Ages ranging from maybe 5 to 9. Ellie Mercer was in the bottom right corner. Her photograph had been circled in red marker. Thick, deliberate strokes. The kind of circle a man draws when he's made a decision. Creed's thumb hovered over the screen. His hand was steady. His jaw was not. "The other 6, he said. "Identified?" "Working on it. Mercy's running the faces through the school district database. 3 of them match enrollment records in this county. The other 3 could be from anywhere. Could be from the states where he's wanted. Could be. Could be kids who already disappeared." Deacon didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them carried the weight of the thing neither man was willing to say out loud at 6:47 in the morning in a motel parking lot while sleet fell on their shoulders and 23 men waited for orders. And somewhere in this city, a 7-year-old girl was waking up in a house where the adults still thought she was imagining things. Creed handed the phone back. "Where is he now?" "Gone." Room was cleared out. No clothes, no bag, no toiletries. Just the corkboard in the vent and a burner phone charger plugged into the wall. He left fast, but not panicked. Everything wiped down. "Cameras?" "1. Rear lot." Buckshot pulled the footage. Shows a man matching the description leaving at approximately 1:30 a.m. On foot, heading east toward the rail yard. After that, nothing. Creed looked east. The rail yard was a sprawl of rusted containers and dead track that stretched for half a mile before bleeding into the industrial corridor. A maze of machine shops, scrap dealers, and abandoned cold storage warehouses where a man could disappear for weeks if he knew how to live without light. "He's still in the city," Creed said. "You don't know that." "He circled her photo, Deacon. He's not done. Men like this don't leave until they finish or get caught, and right now nobody's catching him." Deacon rubbed his face with both hands. He was 56 years old, iron gray beard, a prosthetic left leg below the knee from an IED outside Fallujah, and the permanent squint of a man who'd spent too many years looking at things he wished he hadn't. He'd founded the Iron Saints MC 14 years ago in a garage in the industrial district with 3 other veterans who couldn't reintegrate and didn't want to. The club had grown to nearly 200 members across 4 chapters, but its core had never changed, broken men looking for a reason to stay upright. "I need to ask you something," Deacon said, "and I need you to answer me straight." Creed waited. "When's the last time you talked to Ava?" The question landed like a slap in a quiet room. "That's not relevant." "It's relevant because the last time you attached yourself to a situation involving a kid, you put a man in the hospital and spent 2 years in county. That's not ancient history, Creed. That's your file. That's the thing prosecutors pull up when they want to paint you as a violent offender who belongs in a cage. The man I put in the hospital was beating his son with a socket wrench. And nobody disputes that. But you didn't call the police. You didn't call us. You walked into that house alone at 2 in the morning and you beat a man unconscious with your bare hands. And when the cops showed up, you were sitting on the porch smoking a cigarette like nothing happened. That's not protection. That's rage wearing a mask. Creed's eyes went flat. It was the look that made other men step back. Not anger exactly, but the total absence of expression, the emotional equivalent of a dead phone line. And it meant that whatever Creed was feeling had been pushed so far down that what remained on the surface was something older and colder and far more dangerous than simple fury. Are you telling me to walk away from this? Creed said. I'm telling you to let the club handle it. Full structure. Deacon chain. Intel, surveillance, coordination with Mercy's legal contacts. We do this right, we bring in law enforcement with enough evidence to bury Griggs for life. We do this your way, alone, angry, running on no sleep, and whatever's eating you from the inside. And we give his lawyer every excuse to walk him out of a courtroom. His lawyer? He'll have one. They always do. Creed stared at the motel room door. The number 14 was crooked. The paint was peeling. Inside that room, a man had pinned photographs of children to a board and studied them the way a hunter studies terrain, patiently, methodically, with the calm certainty that the kill would come when conditions aligned. Fine, Creed said. Full structure. Your call. Deacon studied him for a long moment, searching for the lie. He didn't find it, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. The Iron Saints Clubhouse was a converted machine shop on Graves Industrial Road, corrugated steel walls, a concrete floor stained with decades of motor oil, and a wood-burning stove in the corner that Mercy kept loaded with oak splits because she said the cold made the men meaner than they already were, and mean men made bad decisions. By 8 a.m., 37 members had assembled. They stood and sat in loose formation around a central table made from a slab of reclaimed factory wood balanced on engine blocks. Coffee steamed from mismatched mugs. Cigarette smoke layered the air in blue strata. The fluorescent tube above the table hummed at a frequency that Creed had always found unbearable, but never mentioned because complaining about fluorescent light seemed absurd when you shared a room with men who'd survived roadside bombs and helicopter crashes and 3-day firefights in valleys where the sun never reached the ground. Mercy ran the briefing. Her real name was Mercedes Callahan. 41 was. Former JAG paralegal, current bar owner, unofficial legal strategist for the Iron Saints, and the only person in the room who could silence Deacon with a look. She wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no makeup, hair pulled back with a rubber band, and reading glasses perched on the end of a nose that had been broken twice, once in a bar fight, once by an ex-husband who didn't survive the divorce in any meaningful sense of the word. Nolan Griggs, she said, tapping a printed photograph pinned to a portable whiteboard. 41 years old, born in Decatur. Last known employment, seasonal maintenance worker at municipal parks across 3 state lines. Prior convictions. 2 counts of indecent contact with a minor, both pleaded down to misdemeanors due to evidentiary issues. Currently wanted on federal warrants in connection with the disappearance of 2 children in the Midwest. Cases still open, no bodies recovered. The room was silent. Not the respectful silence of attention, the pressurized silence of men who were hearing something that was rearranging the furniture inside their skulls. No bodies recovered, repeated a writer named Toll from the back of the room. He was 29, rail-thin, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, and a voice like a screen door in the wind. He'd been the youngest member patched in, and he had a 4-year-old daughter at home. Meaning what? Meaning they haven't found the children, Mercy said. Meaning they could be dead. Meaning they could be alive and trafficked. Meaning the federal investigators don't know, and Griggs isn't talking. And this man was 20 feet from a kid in Ridley Park last night, Toll said. Yes. And the police filed a report. Yes. Toll looked at the ceiling. His jaw worked like he was chewing something that wouldn't break down. 2 seats away, a writer named Josiah, 53, ex-Marine sniper, hands so steady he could light a match in a windstorm, stared at the photograph of Griggs without blinking. What do we know about the other children on the board? Josiah asked. 3 have been identified through school records, Mercy said. Emma Pruitt, age 6, enrolled at Caro Elementary. Dante Williamson, age 8, enrolled at Eastfield Prep. And a girl named Sophie Chen, age 7, enrolled at Saints at Lakewood Academy. She caught herself. All three attend schools within a 12-mile radius. All three are in after-school or community programs that operate out of public facilities. Public facilities, Deacon said from the head of the table. Parks, community centers, rec halls. Places where Griggs would have had access as a maintenance worker. The implication settled over the room like carbon monoxide. Invisible, odorless, and lethal. I wasn't following Ellie Mercer, Creed said from the corner. He hadn't sat down. He stood with his back against the corrugated wall, arms crossed, a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hand. He was working a list. Every head turned toward him. He's systematic, Creed continued. Seasonal maintenance gives him access to the facilities. He watches. He identifies targets. He builds a dossier, photos, schedules, patterns. He picks the most vulnerable and he moves when conditions favor him. Ellie wasn't his first choice. She was his current one. How do you know she wasn't the first? Someone asked. Because his corkboard had 7 photos and she was the last one pinned. The silence after that sentence lasted 9 seconds. Creed counted. Mercy removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. Here's the legal reality. We have a corkboard that was found without a warrant in a motel room that we accessed without law enforcement authorization. Nothing on that board is admissible. If we hand it to the police, the first thing a defense attorney does is challenge the chain of custody and suppress the evidence. Griggs walks. So we don't hand it to the police, Tull said. Then what do we do with it? We use it ourselves. We find the other kids. We put eyes on every one of them. We build a wall around those families that Griggs can't get through. With what authority? Mercy said. We're a motorcycle club, Tull. We're not law enforcement. We're not social services. Half the men in this room have felony records. The moment we show up at a stranger's house and say we're here to protect their children, we become the threat. Parents call the cops. Cops call the DA. The DA calls a press conference about an outlaw biker gang terrorizing families. We're not a gang, Deacon said quietly. I know that. You know that. But the headline doesn't know that, and headlines are what destroy you. A chair scraped. Josiah stood up, slow and deliberate, the way Creed had stood in the park. Not fast, not angry, just final. I have a question for the room, Josiah said. His voice was barely above a whisper. It always was. Men who'd spent years behind a scope learned to speak like the wind, low, steady, and impossible to ignore. How many of us are in this room right now because somebody failed to protect us when we were kids? Nobody answered. Nobody had to. Creed watched the faces. Tull looked at the floor. A writer named Patch, 47, full-sleeve tattoos covering burn scars from a truck fire in Helmand, closed his eyes. Deacon's prosthetic leg shifted with a mechanical click that sounded louder than it should have in the silence. That's what I thought, Josiah said. He sat back down. Mercy looked at Deacon. Deacon looked at Creed. Creed looked at the photograph of Nolan Griggs on the whiteboard. The deadwater eyes, the patient mouth, the unremarkable face of a man designed by nature or nurture to be invisible in crowds and devastating in private. We need to tell the Mercer family, Creed said. Tell them what? Mercy asked. That a biker club broke into a motel room and found a serial predator's hit list with their daughter's photo on it. That'll go over great. They need to know the threat level. And how do we establish threat level without revealing how we obtained the intelligence? We don't. We tell them the truth. Mercy stared at him. The truth gets the evidence thrown out. The truth keeps Ellie alive. The room divided. Not physically. Nobody moved, nobody raised a voice. But Creed could feel the fracture forming like a crack in river ice, the kind you don't see until your weight is already committed and the water is already reaching for your boots. Half the room wanted structure, protocol, Deacon's chain. Feed the evidence to Mercy's legal contacts, let them find a way to introduce it through proper channels. Build a case that would hold up in court and put Griggs away for decades. It was the smart play, the safe play. The play that protected the club and its members, and its reputation, and everything. Deacon had spent 14 years building from a garage on Graves Industrial Road. The other half of the room looked at Creed, and Creed was looking at the corkboard photograph of Ellie Mercer's face, circled in red, and thinking about the weight of 2 tiny frozen fingers wrapped around his scarred index finger in a park where nobody came after dark. Vote, Deacon said. It was close. 19 to 18, Protocol 1. Creed said nothing. He finished his cold coffee, set the mug on the windowsill, and walked outside. The industrial road was empty. Ice coated the power lines. The sky had turned the color of dishwater, and the wind carried the smell of diesel and frozen metal from the rail yard half a mile east, where Nolan Griggs had disappeared into the dark 14 hours ago. Deacon followed him out. They stood beside Creed's Harley without speaking for a full minute. Two men who'd known each other for 11 years, who'd ridden through thunderstorms and courtrooms and hospital corridors together, who'd carried each other's weight in ways that couldn't be measured or explained to anyone who hadn't been there. "You're going to do it anyway," Deacon said. "Do what?" "Tell the family. Go around the vote. Do it your way." Creed pulled a cigarette from the pack in his cut pocket and lit it with a steel Zippo that had a dent in the casing from a bullet that missed his chest by 3 inches in a place he couldn't pronounce and didn't want to remember. "I keep thinking about the 2 kids in the Midwest," Creed said. "The ones they never found." "Don't. Somebody knew. Somebody saw something. Somebody had a piece of the puzzle and held on to it because the timing wasn't right, or the channel wasn't proper, or the legal strategy wasn't clean enough. And while they waited, 2 children vanished. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. That's the whole point." Deacon's prosthetic clicked as he shifted weight. The cold made the joint stiff. He told Creed once that winter was the season he hated most, not because of the temperature, but because the cold made the phantom limb scream. The leg that wasn't there anymore aching like it was still attached and still on fire and still pinned under steel in a ditch outside Fallujah while the sky turned black with smoke. "If you go rogue on this," Deacon said, "I can't protect you. Not from the club. Not from the law." "I'm not asking you to." "You never ask. That's the problem. You just act and let everyone else deal with the wreckage." Creed exhaled smoke into the frozen air. It hung there like a ghost that couldn't decide whether to leave or stay. "Ava stopped talking to me because of the last time," he said quietly. "You know that." "I know." "She was 16. She saw the news. Her father arrested for beating a man half to death. Every kid at school knew. Her mother used it in the custody modification. Full restriction. No contact." He paused. "I haven't heard my daughter's voice in 3 years. And you're willing to risk making it 4? There are 7 children on that board, Deacon. 7. And one of them grabbed my hand last night and told me the truth. And I'm not going to sit in a clubhouse and wait for a legal strategy while Nolan Griggs figures out which window to crawl through." Deacon closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed. Not his mind. His mind was made up and had been since the vote. But something behind the decision, some structural beam that held the logic in place had shifted, and in the gap between what was right and what was safe, Deacon made a choice that wasn't either. 48 hours, he said. Creed looked at him. "You've got 48 hours to talk to the family, secure the situation, and bring me something actionable that Mercy can use. If you can do that without putting the club at risk, I'll back you publicly. If you can't, I know. You don't. Because what I'm about to say next is something I've never said to a patched member in 14 years. Deacon's voice dropped to a register that Creed had only heard once before, in a VA corridor at 3 a.m., when Deacon told him that the third member of their squad, a man named Colton, had swallowed his service weapon in a parking garage in Memphis, and nobody found him for 2 days. If you go off the rails on this, if you touch Griggs, if you put hands on anyone, if you give a prosecutor 1 inch of daylight, I will pull your patch myself, and I will do it in front of the club, and you will not come back." The wind blew. The power lines hummed. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded, long, low, and full of the kind of loneliness that doesn't have a name, because naming it would make it real. 48 hours, Creed said. He kicked the Harley to life. The engine roared and the sound traveled down Graves Industrial Road, like a declaration of war that hadn't been officially announced. But everyone could feel coming, the way animals feel, earthquakes before the ground starts moving. Creed rode east, toward the Mercer house, toward a conversation that would change everything, toward a family that didn't know yet that their daughter's face was pinned to a dead man's wall with a red circle around it like a target, and toward a 48-hour window that was already closing, because at that exact moment, in a lightless room inside a derelict cold storage warehouse 3 miles from the rail yard, Nolan Griggs sat on a concrete floor with a prepaid phone in his hand, scrolling through photographs he'd taken over the past 6 weeks. Ellie at the bus stop. Ellie outside the school fence. Ellie walking home in the rain with her hood up and her head down and nobody beside her. He stopped on the last photograph, taken 2 days ago from across the street through the window of a parked van. Ellie sitting in her bedroom, drawing at her desk. Alone. He set the phone down, pulled a folded map from his jacket pocket, and traced a route with his finger, from the warehouse to a residential street 4 miles west, where a house with a broken porch light and a backyard fence with a missing slat sat between two vacant lots in a neighborhood where the nearest police response time averaged 23 minutes. He folded the map. He checked the time, and he began to wait, the way he always waited, with the terrifying mechanical patience of a man who had never once been stopped before and saw no reason to believe tonight would be any different. The Mercer house sat at the end of Dalton Street like a tooth that should have been pulled years ago. Creed killed the engine 2 doors down and sat on the bike for a full minute, studying the property through the gray morning light. Single-story ranch, vinyl siding the color of nicotine, a porch light that was either burned out or had never worked. Chain-link fence around the backyard with a section near the southeast corner where 2 posts had separated, leaving a gap wide enough for a grown man to slide through without touching metal. He saw it immediately. The gap. And he knew, with the cold surgical certainty of a man who'd spent years learning how violence finds its way into places that feel safe, that Nolan Griggs had seen it too. Creed walked up the front steps. The wood groaned under his weight. A plastic tricycle lay on its side near the door, one wheel missing, and a welcome mat so faded the words had dissolved into a brown smear. He knocked 3 times. Nothing. He knocked again. A chain rattled. The door opened 4 inches, stopped by the latch, and Dana Mercer's face appeared in the gap. Exhausted, suspicious, her eyes scanning from Creed's boots to his cut to the scar on his face, and back down again like she was cataloging evidence for a report she'd already decided to file. "It's 7 in the morning," she said. "I know. My husband's asleep. The baby was up all night." "I'm not here to talk to your husband." Dana stared at him through the 4-inch gap, and Creed could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The rapid-fire maternal arithmetic of risk assessment, the same math every woman in every doorway, in every rough neighborhood in the country performs a dozen times a day without anyone ever acknowledging it. "The man from the park," she said. "You're the biker." "Yes." "Ellie hasn't stopped talking about you." "That's not why I'm here either." Something in his voice must have registered because Dana's hand moved to the chain and hesitated there. Fingers resting on the metal, not releasing it, not pulling away, suspended in the narrow space between instinct and logic, where all the important decisions get made. "What do you want?" she asked. "I need to tell you something about the man who's been following your daughter, and you're going to want to sit down when I do." Dana unhooked the chain. The kitchen smelled like formula and dish soap. Creed sat at a table covered in a vinyl cloth printed with faded sunflowers. His leather cut draped over the back of a chair that was too small for him. His hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that Dana had poured without asking, because some gestures are automatic even when you're terrified. And the man sitting in your kitchen looks like he was assembled from scrap iron and bad memories. He told her everything. Not the sanitized version. Not the legally strategic version Mercy would have preferred. The truth? Raw, uncut, and brutal. The motel room. The corkboard. The 7 photographs. The federal warrants. The 2 children in the Midwest who had never been found. And the red circle around Ellie's face that meant she wasn't a random target. She was chosen. Dana didn't cry. That was the part that shook Creed. He'd expected tears. He'd prepared for tears the way you prepare for weather, not because you can stop it, but because you need to know which direction it's coming from. Instead, Dana Mercer sat perfectly still with both hands flat on the sunflower tablecloth and her jaw set at an angle that Creed recognized from a different context entirely. The angle of a soldier receiving a mission brief that confirms the worst possible scenario and processing it not as emotion, but as tactical information. "How long?" she said. "At least 6 weeks, based on what we found." 6 weeks. She repeated it like she was testing the weight of it. 6 weeks this man has been watching my daughter. 6 weeks I told her she was imagining things. 6 weeks I sent her to a school counselor who gave her a card that tells her to breathe in for 4 seconds. Her voice didn't break. It calcified. 6 weeks. You didn't know. I'm her mother. I'm supposed to know. You're her mother, not a criminal profiler. This man has done this before, Mrs. Mercer. He's good at it. That's the whole problem. Dana looked at the hallway that led to the bedrooms. Somewhere in the back of the house, Ellie was asleep. Safe. For now. The word "for now" hung in the kitchen like smoke from a fire nobody could find. "What do you want me to do?" Dana asked. "Lock the doors, fix the fence. Don't let Ellie out of your sight, and don't send her to school on Monday. She has to go to school. Not until we find him." "We? Who's we? Your motorcycle club?" "Yes." Dana laughed. It was not the sound of amusement. It was the sound of something structural failing, a load-bearing wall that had held up through years of 2 jobs and no sleep, and WIC paperwork, and ear infections at 3 a.m., and a marriage that functioned on caffeine and silence, finally developing a crack that went all the way through. "A motorcycle club is going to protect my daughter from a federal fugitive," she said. "That's the plan. The plan is to keep her alive while we build enough evidence for law enforcement to act." "And what happens to us while you're building evidence? What happens when this man comes to my house, Mr. Hollow? When he finds the gap in my fence that I've been asking my landlord to fix since September? When he comes through a window at 2 a.m. and my husband is at the warehouse working a double shift and I'm alone with 2 children and a kitchen knife?" Creed met her eyes. "He won't get to the fence," he said, "because there'll be someone between him and your house every hour of every day until this is over." "Who?" "Us." The sound of a door opening interrupted them. Ellie stood in the hallway in pajamas printed with cartoon cats, her hair tangled, her eyes half shut against the kitchen light. She saw Creed and her face changed. Not fear, not surprise, but something that looked terrifyingly like relief. The kind of relief that only comes when a drowning person sees the rope they'd stopped believing existed. "You came back," she said. "I said I would." "People say that a lot." Creed felt the crack in his chest widen another inch. "Go back to bed, baby," Dana said. "Mr. Hollow is leaving." Ellie didn't move. She stood in the hallway with her bare feet on the cold linoleum and looked back and forth between her mother and Creed with the preternatural radar of a child who has learned to read adult tension the way sailors read weather. Not from what's said, but from what isn't. "Are you fighting?" she asked. "No," Dana said. "You look like you're fighting." "We're talking, Ellie. Go back to bed." Ellie looked at Creed. "Is he still out there?" Creed opened his mouth to answer, and Dana cut him off with a look so sharp it could have drawn blood. He closed his mouth. This was her house. Her daughter. Her call. "Nobody's out there," Dana said. "Go." Ellie went. The hallway light turned off. A door clicked shut, and Dana Mercer placed both hands on the table again and looked at Creed Hollow, with the expression of a woman who had just lied to her daughter, and knew that the lie was necessary, and knew that the lie was poison, and knew that the difference between those two things had collapsed into a space so small that navigating it required the kind of precision she wasn't sure she possessed. "Fix my fence," she said. "Today, and don't come to the front door again." Creed nodded once, stood, and left through the back. By noon, 4 Iron Saints occupied positions around the Mercer property in rotating 2-hour shifts. They didn't park in front. They didn't announce themselves. One sat in a pickup truck on the cross street with a thermos of coffee and a line of sight to the backyard. Another walked the perimeter every 30 minutes in work boots and a heavy coat, no cut, no visible patches. Just a large, watchful man who looked like he might be a contractor checking property lines. Creed fixed the fence himself. 3 posts, 16 screws, and a piece of galvanized steel mesh he'd picked up from the hardware store on Route 6 with cash and no receipt. He worked in silence, his hands red from the cold, his breath visible in the gray air, while inside the house Ellie watched him through the kitchen window, with her chin resting on the sill and her eyes tracking every movement he made. At 1:47 p.m., his phone rang. "Mercy. We've got a problem." "Which kind?" "The kind that changes everything. Get to the clubhouse. Now." He left the fence half finished. 3 posts set, one still leaning. He told the rider on the cross street to close the gap in coverage and rode to Graves Industrial Road, with the throttle open and the cold wind cutting through his jacket like it had a personal vendetta. The clubhouse was different when he walked in. He could feel it before he could name it, a change in atmospheric pressure, in the way the men stood, in the quality of the silence. Deacon sat at the head of the table with his hands folded and his eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance that didn't correspond to any physical object in the room. Mercy stood beside the whiteboard with her arms crossed and her reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and an expression that Creed had only seen once before, 2 years ago, when she discovered that a member's wife had been forging club documents to steal from the mutual aid fund. It was the expression of someone who had found the worst thing in the room and was trying to figure out how to hold it up without it contaminating everything it touched. "Close the door," Deacon said. Creed closed it. "Sit down." "I'll stand." "Sit down." Creed sat. Mercy uncrossed her arms and picked up a manila folder from the table. Inside were 3 printed pages. Dense text, small font, what looked like government database output, with routing numbers along the margins. "I ran Griggs through every database I have access to," she said. "Federal warrants, state registries, employment records, municipal contracts. The maintenance work checks out. He was employed by a private contractor called Greystone Municipal Services, which holds seasonal contracts with parks departments in 11 counties across 4 states. Okay. Greystone Municipal Services is a subsidiary of a company called Ethos Property Group." Creed waited. The name meant nothing to him. "Ethos Property Group is a holding company registered in this state," Mercy continued. "It manages commercial real estate, municipal service contracts, and this is where it gets interesting. It provides staffing for after-school programs, community centers, and youth recreational facilities through a workforce placement subsidiary called Community First Staffing." The room temperature dropped. Not literally, but Creed felt it in his joints, in the back of his neck, in the place behind his sternum where the old combat instinct lived, the one that whispered incoming before the mortar landed, the one that had saved his life 4 times and ruined it in every other way. "Community First Staffing," he repeated. "They place maintenance workers, custodians, program assistants, and seasonal support staff in public youth facilities. Background checks are listed as a requirement on their website. But when I pulled the actual screening protocols through a contact at the Labor Department..." Mercy paused. She removed her glasses entirely and set them on the table with the careful precision of someone putting down a loaded weapon. "The background checks are outsourced to a third-party firm that hasn't updated its criminal database in 19 months. Federal warrants don't populate. Interstate offenses don't transfer. A man with active warrants in 3 states can pass the screening and get placed in a building full of children within 72 hours of applying." Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room. The kind that empties it, pushes out all the oxygen, all the casual assumptions, all the comfortable beliefs about how the system works and who's watching the gates, and leaves behind nothing but the cold structural understanding that the gates were never watched at all. "How many facilities?" Creed asked. His voice was very quiet. "In this county alone? 14. Community centers, recreational programs, after-school sites. Ethos holds the staffing contract for all of them." "How many workers placed through Community First?" "Over 100 in the past 2 years." "How many of them are like Griggs?" Mercy didn't answer. She didn't need to. The question wasn't how many. The question was how could anyone know, because the system that was supposed to know had been broken for 19 months. And nobody had noticed because the buildings were clean and the programs were funded, and the parents dropped their children off at 3:15 and picked them up at 5:30, and the space between those hours was invisible, a gap in the fence that nobody checked because checking would mean admitting that the fence wasn't enough. Deacon stood up. When Deacon stood, the room reconfigured. It was involuntary, architectural, the way soldiers reorient when a commanding officer rises. Not obedience, gravity. "This isn't one man anymore," Deacon said. "This is a system, a broken pipeline that's placing unchecked workers in facilities where they have direct access to children. Griggs isn't an anomaly, he's a symptom." "We can't take on a corporate staffing pipeline," Tull said from the corner. His face was white. "We're a motorcycle club." "We're not taking on a pipeline," Deacon said. "We're protecting 7 children whose faces are pinned to a corkboard while the pipeline gets exposed." "Exposed how?" Mercy said. "I obtained this information through channels that will not survive a courtroom challenge. The Labor Department contact is off the record. The database access was a favor, not a subpoena. If we go public with this, Ethos lawyers will bury us in litigation before the first news cycle ends." "Then we don't go public," Creed said. "We go to the families." "Creed?" 7 families, 7 children. We tell them what we know. We give them the tools to protect their own kids. We set up watches, escorts, school pickups, and we find Griggs before he finishes what he started." And the pipeline? The pipeline is Mercy's fight. She finds the legal angle that holds up. I keep the kids alive while she does. Mercy and Deacon exchanged a look. Creed recognized it. The silent negotiation of two people who've been running an organization together long enough to communicate in glances the way other people communicate in paragraphs. There's something else, Mercy said. Creed braced. One of the other children on the corkboard, Emma Pruitt, age 6. I tracked her enrollment records to find a parent contact. Mercy opened the folder to the second page. Her mother's name is Christine Pruitt. She works as an administrative assistant. She paused. At Athos Property Group. The room didn't move. The woman who employs Nolan Griggs, Creed said slowly, has a daughter on his target list. Christine Pruitt doesn't employ Griggs directly. She works in administrative support, probably scheduling and filing. There's no evidence she knows about the screening failures. But the connection is there, and it means one of two things. Either this is a coincidence that a prosecutor could use to establish a pattern of institutional negligence, or it's not a coincidence at all, and someone inside Athos knows exactly who they're placing in those facilities and why. Who runs Ethos? A man named Victor Linden, real estate developer, municipal contract specialist, significant political donor. Connected, well represented. Not someone who gets investigated casually. I don't care who he is. You should. Because if Victor Linden is involved, if this is deliberate rather than negligent, then we're not dealing with a broken screening system. We're dealing with a network. And a network has resources, legal protection, and the ability to make problems disappear. Like two children in the Midwest who were never found, Josiah said from the back of the room. His voice was barely audible. His hands were perfectly still on the table. Nobody responded. Because the implication of that sentence was so large and so dark that responding to it would mean accepting its full weight, and the full weight of it was enough to crush the foundations of everything they thought they were doing and replace it with something that had no boundary, no bottom, and no clear path to daylight. Creed stood up. Where are you going? Deacon said. Emma Pruitt's house. Creed, the 48 hours? The 48 hours assumed we were dealing with one predator and one victim. We're not. We're dealing with 7 victims, a corporate pipeline, and the possibility that someone at the top knows exactly what's happening. The clock you gave me doesn't fit the problem anymore. Then we reset the clock. There is no clock, not for the kids. Griggs is in a warehouse somewhere right now looking at photographs of Ellie Mercer's bedroom. He knows I saw him. He knows someone is looking. That means his timeline just accelerated. He's not going to wait for conditions to align anymore. He's going to move, because moving is safer than staying still when the ground starts shaking. Deacon's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Disagreement, recognition, defeat. Not defeat in the sense of surrender. Defeat in the sense of a man who realizes that the situation has outgrown the container he built for it, and the walls are coming down whether he opens the door or not. Take Josiah, Deacon said, and Tull. 3-man team. I want check-ins every 2 hours. No direct contact with any Athos-connected individual without Mercy's clearance. And Creed, yeah. If you find Griggs, I know. Say it. I call you. I don't touch him. I call you. Swear it. Creed looked at Deacon. At the gray beard, the tired eyes, the prosthetic leg, the 14 years of holding a brotherhood together with nothing but willpower, and the stubborn belief that damaged men could still do undamaged things. I swear it, Creed said. He walked out into the cold. Josiah and Tull were waiting by their bikes, engines already running, exhaust curling into the frozen air like white serpents dissolving against the gray sky. Neither man spoke. Creed mounted the Dyna, kicked it into gear, and pulled onto Graves Industrial Road with Josiah on his left and Tull on his right, 3 bikes moving through the industrial corridor in tight formation, the combined thunder of their engines echoing off the corrugated walls of empty warehouses and rolling eastward toward the residential neighborhoods, where 7 families were going about their Saturday afternoon, with no idea that the distance between their children and the dark had just gotten thinner than paper. They made it 4 miles. Creed's phone rang. He pulled to the shoulder. Josiah and Tull flanked him, engines idling. Creed looked at the screen. It was Dana Mercer. He's here. Her voice was a controlled whisper that contained more terror per syllable than a scream. I can see him from the upstairs window. He's standing across the street. Blue cap, just standing there, looking at the house. Creed's vision narrowed to a point. Where's Ellie? In her room. The baby's with me. Where's my guy? The rider on the cross street? I don't see anyone. The truck is gone. Creed looked at Josiah. Josiah looked at Tull. All three men had the same thing happening behind their eyes. The rapid, involuntary calculation of distance, speed, and time that combat veterans perform without conscious thought. The mental arithmetic of survival that never fully shuts off even decades after the last deployment. The Mercer house was 11 minutes away. Lock every door, Creed said into the phone. Every window. Take both children into the bathroom. Interior room, no windows. Do not open the door for anyone. I'm coming. He ended the call and twisted the throttle so hard the front wheel lifted off the frozen asphalt. 3 Harleys screamed through the streets of a city that didn't know what was happening and wouldn't have believed it if someone had tried to explain. That a man who pinned children's photographs to a corkboard the way an entomologist pins insects was standing in broad daylight outside a house where a 7-year-old girl was drawing at her desk. And the only force moving to intercept him was 3 damaged men on motorcycles who had promised not to touch him and weren't sure they could keep that promise, and weren't sure they wanted to. 11 minutes, Creed counted every one of them. And when he turned onto Dalton Street at 2:23 p.m., with Josiah and Tull roaring behind him, he saw 2 things simultaneously that made his blood freeze and his hands tighten on the handlebars until the leather of his gloves creaked. The first was the empty space across the street where Dana said Griggs had been standing. He was gone. The second was the Mercer house's back gate, the section of fence Creed had been repairing that morning, the 3 posts he'd set and the one he'd left leaning when Mercy called. The gate was open, and the leaning post had been pulled completely out of the frozen ground, leaving a gap wide enough for a man to walk through without breaking stride. Creed was off the bike before it stopped moving. The Harley slid sideways on the frozen street, front tire catching a patch of black ice, and the machine went down hard on its left side with a sound like a body hitting pavement, chrome scraping asphalt, mirror shattering, engine still running, rear wheel spinning uselessly against the winter air. He didn't look back. He was already running, boots hammering the cracked sidewalk, cut flapping behind him, and every step sent a jolt of pain through the knee he'd shattered in Kandahar, that the VA surgeon said would never bend right again, and never did. The gate was open. The post he'd left leaning that morning had been ripped from the frozen ground with enough force to split the wood at the base. Fresh splinters lay in the dirt like bone fragments. The galvanized mesh he'd screwed into the crossbar hung loose, peeled back, curling in the wind. Creed went through the gap. The backyard was small, dead grass, a plastic sandbox filled with rainwater and frozen leaves, a clothesline with nothing on it, and a back door that was closed but not latched. The knob turned freely in his hand, no resistance, no lock, and the door swung inward into a mudroom that smelled like wet boots and laundry detergent, and something else, something chemical, something that didn't belong. Cigarette smoke. Fresh. Not his brand. Thinner, cheaper. The kind that came from gas station packs bought with cash by men who didn't want receipts. Creed stopped breathing. He stood in the mudroom with one hand on the doorframe and the other reaching for the small of his back where 15 years of muscle memory said a weapon should be and wasn't because he'd made a promise to Deacon, and because carrying a firearm as a convicted felon would send him back to county for a decade, and because promises were the only architecture holding his life together, and if he dismantled one more load-bearing wall, the whole structure would collapse. He had his hands. His hands had always been enough. He moved through the mudroom into the kitchen. The sunflower tablecloth was still on the table. Dana's coffee mug sat where she'd left it, half full, a skin of cold milk on the surface. The house was silent in the way that houses are silent when silence is being enforced. Not empty quiet, but held quiet, the quiet of people trying very hard not to be heard. "Dana," he called, low, controlled. Nothing. "Dana, it's Creed. I'm in the kitchen." A sound from upstairs. Not a voice. A tap. 3 taps, evenly spaced, against what sounded like a hollow core door. A signal. The kind of signal you make when you can't speak because speaking would reveal your position to someone who's listening. Creed moved to the base of the stairs. The staircase was narrow, carpeted in something brown and threadbare, and it turned once at a landing before reaching the second floor. From where he stood, he could see the landing and nothing beyond it. The cigarette smell was stronger here. It drifted down the stairwell like a ghost descending. He's in the house. The thought was not panic, it was geometry, distance, angles, cover. The same calculations he'd performed 1,000 times in buildings that smelled like dust and cordite in provinces he couldn't pronounce. Except this time the building was a family home on Dalton Street, and the hostages were a mother, a baby, and a 7-year-old girl who had grabbed his hand in a frozen park because he was the scariest thing she could find, and scary things keep the monsters away. Creed took the first step. The carpet muffled his boot. He took the second, the third. At the landing, he pressed his back against the wall and listened. Breathing. Not Dana's. Not a child's. The slow, measured breathing of a man who was comfortable in spaces he shouldn't be. The respiratory signature of someone whose heart rate hadn't elevated because he'd done this enough times that the adrenaline system no longer classified it as danger. Creed came around the corner. The hallway had 4 doors, 2 on the left, 2 on the right. The first door on the left was open. The master bedroom, visible from the hallway, empty, bed unmade. The second door on the left was closed. The bathroom. Dana and the children were behind it. He could hear the baby making the soft, hiccuping sounds that babies make when they've been crying and have exhausted themselves into a kind of trembling semi-quiet. The first door on the right was a linen closet, cracked open, nothing inside but towels and a water heater. The second door on the right was Ellie's room. It was closed, and standing in front of it, with his back to Creed and one hand resting on the doorknob, was Nolan Griggs. The blue trucker cap, the canvas jacket, work boots leaving wet prints on the hallway carpet. He stood perfectly still, head slightly tilted, listening to whatever sounds came through the door the way a man listens to music he's been waiting a long time to hear. Creed's vision went red at the edges. The old thing, the animal, the machine, the part of him that the army had built, and the war had fed, and the prison had caged but never killed, surged upward from the basement of his ribs like a detonation in a mine shaft, and for one terrible second he felt nothing except the distance between his hands and the back of Nolan Griggs's neck, and how easy it would be to close that distance, and how satisfying it would be to feel the vertebrae separate under his fingers, and how quiet the house would become afterward. 1 second. He counted it. Then he said, "Turn around." Griggs turned. He turned slowly, without surprise, without fear, the way a man turns when he hears a sound he's been expecting. His face was exactly what the mugshot showed. Hollow cheeks, thin mouth, eyes the color of standing water in a ditch. Up close, those eyes had a quality that photographs couldn't capture. An absence. Not evil, exactly. Something worse. The total, clinical removal of the part of the brain that recognizes other human beings as human beings. Creed had seen it once before, in a detainee in Bagram, who had done things to a village that the debrief officer couldn't finish describing, and the man had sat in the interrogation room and eaten a sandwich and asked for a second one. "You're the biker," Griggs said. His voice was soft, pleasant, almost. The voice of a man who'd spent years learning exactly how to sound harmless. "From the park." Creed didn't answer. He stood 6 feet away with his fists at his sides and every muscle in his body locked in the isometric tension of a man holding himself back from the one thing every cell in his body was screaming to do. "She's not in there, by the way," Griggs said, nodding toward Ellie's door. "I checked. Smart mother. Moved the kids." He smiled. The smile didn't reach his eyes. It didn't try. "I just wanted to see the room." Step away from the door. Or what? 3 feet of hallway. Creed could cross it in less than a second. He knew this because he'd measured distances like this his entire adult life. The distance between his position and the threat. The distance between intention and action. The thin membrane of restraint that separates a man from the thing he becomes when the membrane tears. "You won't do it," Griggs said. He was reading Creed the way Creed had read him in the park. The geometry of violence, the angles, the tells. "You're a felon. I can see it in how you're standing. You know what happens if you touch me. Prison. Real prison. Not county. And your club, whatever it is, they lose their poster boy." Step away from the door. "I'm leaving. I was always leaving. I just wanted you to know something first." Griggs took 1 step to the side, away from the door, toward the staircase. His hands stayed in his jacket pockets. His breathing didn't change. "You can't watch her forever. You know that. People get tired. Schedules slip. Attention wanders. And I don't get tired. I don't wander. He took another step. I'll be somewhere else next month. A different city, different park, different girl. And nobody will stop me there either because nobody ever does. Creed's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't look at it. You want to hit me, Griggs said. I can see it. Your hands are shaking. Go ahead. Give me the lawsuit. Give me the leverage. Give your prosecutor the story he needs to put you away and leave this family with nobody. Creed's right hand opened and closed, opened, closed. The tendons in his forearms stood out like bridge cables under tension. Griggs smiled again and walked past him. He walked past Creed hollow in a hallway, so narrow their shoulders nearly touched. And Creed didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink, stood there like a man made of concrete while a child predator strolled past him close enough to smell the cheap tobacco on his jacket and descended the stairs with the unhurried pace of someone leaving a house he fully intended to return to. The front door opened, closed, footsteps on the porch, then nothing. Creed's knees buckled. He caught himself against the wall, one hand flat on the plaster, and stood there for 5 seconds while his nervous system processed what had just happened and what had almost happened, and the difference between those two things, which was exactly the width of a single decision that he'd made, not because it was right, but because making the other decision would have destroyed the only thing Ellie Mercer had left, the belief that the scariest man in the room was safe. He straightened up. He knocked on the bathroom door. Dana, he's gone. The door opened and Dana stood there with the baby pressed against her chest and Ellie behind her, gripping the back of her mother's shirt with both fists. Dana's face was white. Her pupils were dilated to the point where her eyes looked black. She was trembling from scalp to fingertips, with the full-body adrenaline response of a mammal that has just survived a predator encounter and hasn't yet gotten the signal that the predator is actually gone. He was inside my house, she said. Yes. He was standing outside my daughter's bedroom door. Yes. And you let him walk out. Creed met her eyes. He could see what she needed. She needed him to have stopped it, ended it, made it final with the violence his body was built for, the violence that every line of his history said he was capable of. She needed the monster to be gone permanently, not temporarily, and the fact that Creed had chosen restraint over annihilation looked, from where she was standing, indistinguishable from failure. If I'd touched him, Creed said, I'd go to prison, and he'd walk free on a civil rights violation, and your daughter would have no one. She has no one now? She has me. She has 20 men who haven't slept in 36 hours. She has us. Dana's jaw tightened. Your man on the cross street was gone. The truck was gone. Where was your 20 men when Nolan Griggs walked through my back gate? Creed had no answer for that, because she was right. Outside, Josiah and Tull had secured the perimeter. Josiah stood at the back gate with his hands in his pockets and murder in his eyes, scanning the alley that ran behind Dalton Street, his gaze tracking every shadow, every dumpster, every gap between buildings where a man could disappear. Tull was on the phone with Deacon, speaking in short, clipped sentences, his voice vibrating with the controlled fury of a man who has a 4-year-old daughter at home and has just learned that a predator walked into a child's house in broad daylight while the club's surveillance failed. Creed stepped onto the porch. He called Deacon. Where's the rider who was on the cross street? Silence. Then, Patch. He was on rotation. He wasn't here. The truck was gone. Griggs walked straight in. More silence, the kind that carries weight. I'll find out what happened, Deacon said. Get back to the clubhouse. We're going to full lockdown protocol. I'm not leaving this house. Creed, I said, I'm not leaving. He hung up. At 4:17 p.m., Deacon called back. Patch got a call, he said. His voice was different now, stripped down. The voice of a man delivering a field report that he knows will change the tactical situation irreversibly. 30 minutes before Griggs showed up at the Mercer house. An anonymous call to Patch's personal cell. Not the club line, not the burner, his personal number. The caller said there was a child in distress at the warehouse district on Fulton. Patch responded. It was empty. A decoy. Creed closed his eyes. Someone pulled our man off position, he said. Yes. Someone who knew our rotation. Yes. Someone who had Patch's personal number. Yes. The implications stacked up like bricks in a wall that was building itself around them. Griggs didn't find the Mercer house on his own today, Creed said. He knew exactly when the surveillance gap would open. That means he's not alone. He's connected to someone who knows what we're doing and when we're doing it. I know. To someone inside our perimeter. Deacon didn't respond for a long time. When he did, his voice was so low Creed had to press the phone against his ear to hear it over the wind. Get to the clubhouse. Bring Josiah and Toll. Leave 2 fresh riders at the Mercer house. Men I pick, not volunteers. And Creed. Yeah. Don't tell anyone what I just told you. Not Toll, not Josiah. Nobody. If we have a leak, the leak can't know we know. Creed looked through the window at Ellie, who sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard gaze of a combat veteran, except she was 7 years old and the combat zone was her own house. Understood, he said. The clubhouse at 6 p.m. felt like a bunker before bombardment. Deacon had called a closed session, officers only. That meant 6 men in the back room. Deacon, Creed, Mercy, Josiah, Tull, and a writer named Dutch who served as the club's sergeant-at-arms. A role that in the Iron Saints meant something closer to internal affairs than external enforcement. Dutch was 50, bald, built like a fire hydrant, with a voice like a clogged drain and the interpersonal warmth of a January sidewalk. He ran security, communications, vetting. If there was a leak in the Iron Saints, Dutch was the man who would find it, or the man who already knew about it. Mercy spread the ethos documents on the table alongside a new set of printouts she'd obtained in the last 3 hours. Phone records, staffing schedules, and a single page that she placed face down in the center of the table and didn't flip over. Start with Patch, Deacon said. Dutch cleared his throat. Patch says the call came from an unknown number at 1:52 p.m., male voice, agitated, said he was a neighbor on Fulton Street who heard a child screaming in a warehouse. Patch broke protocol and responded solo because the location was 4 minutes from his position and he believed the threat was imminent. Broke protocol, Mercy repeated. He should have called it into the chain before moving. He didn't. He's been with the club for 3 years and this is the first breach. Is he compromised or stupid? Tull asked. Stupid, Dutch said. I've known him since he patched. He's not a traitor. He's impulsive, and he panicked because the caller mentioned a child, and Patch has a thing about children. His younger brother was abused in foster care. It's in his intake file. Whoever made that call knew exactly which button to push. Which means they've studied us, Creed said, or they have access to information about our members that isn't public. The room tightened. Mercy picked up the face-down page and turned it over. It was a photograph. Grainy, taken from a distance, slightly overexposed. It showed the Iron Saints clubhouse from across the road, the corrugated steel walls, the row of bikes, the hand-painted sign above the garage door. The photograph was time-stamped from 3 days ago. I found this in the Ethos digital infrastructure, Mercy said, buried in an internal communications folder on a cloud server that my contact accessed. It was sent as an email attachment from an address registered to Greystone Municipal Services, Griggs's employer, to an address registered to Victor Linden's personal assistant. Victor Linden has a photograph of our clubhouse, Deacon said. Victor Linden, or someone in his organization, has been watching us since before we knew Griggs existed. Creed felt the floor shift beneath him. Not physically, structurally. The entire framework of the situation, one predator, one child, one protective intervention, was collapsing like a building whose foundation had been removed while everyone was looking at the roof. This was never a story about a lone stalker and a little girl. This was a story about a system that manufactured access, a corporation that profited from placing unchecked workers in proximity to children, and a man at the top who was sophisticated enough to surveil the only people who'd noticed. How deep does this go? Josiah asked. I don't know yet, Mercy said, but I know this. Victor Linden's political donations in the last 3 years include contributions to 4 county commissioners who voted to approve Ethos staffing contracts for public youth facilities. He also sits on the advisory board of the County Parks Commission. And his personal foundation has funded, wait for it, the background screening company that hasn't updated its criminal database in 19 months. He funded his own screening failure, Tull said. He created it. The sentence fell into the room like a stone into deep water, and the ripples spread outward through every man at the table, rearranging everything they thought they understood about what they were facing and what it would cost to face it. Creed stood up. Where are the 7 families? He said. We've identified and contacted 4, Mercy said. The Mercers, The Pruitts. Christine Pruitt was terrified but cooperative once I explained the situation without revealing sources. The Williamsons. And the Chens. The other 3 children on the corkboard haven't been identified yet. Put riders on all 4 families tonight. Full rotation. No single-man posts. Pairs, 2-hour shifts, with a roving third on a 2-block perimeter. That's 24 men for overnight coverage alone, Dutch said. Plus the clubhouse. Plus the motel site. Then call every chapter. Call every patched member. Call every prospect. I don't care if they're in the next county. Get them here. Deacon raised his hand. Not for a vote. For silence. We do this, he said, and we cross a line. We're not responding to one incident anymore. We're running a coordinated protection operation against a corporate entity with political connections and legal firepower. If Victor Linden decides to come at us, he'll come with attorneys, injunctions, restraining orders, and media narratives that paint us as a criminal organization harassing families. He'll file RICO. He'll freeze our accounts. He'll turn every felony record in this room into a headline. Let him, Creed said. Easy to say, hard to survive. I've spent 14 years building something that keeps men alive. Men who would have eaten bullets in parking garages and VA corridors if they didn't have somewhere to ride and someone to ride with. If Linden dismantles the club, those men lose the only thing holding them upright. The room was silent. Creed looked at Deacon. He saw the cost written across the older man's face. The exhaustion, the weight, the 14 years of holding a brotherhood together with nothing but a garage and a promise, and the relentless refusal to let one more veteran disappear into the dark. Deacon, Creed said, there are 7 children on a wall. I know. 2 of them in the Midwest never came home. I know. If we don't move tonight, and something happens to Ellie Mercer or Emma Pruitt or any of those kids, if one of them disappears while we're calculating risk, we don't survive that either. Not legally, not reputationally. In here. He pressed his fist against his own chest. In here, we're done. Deacon looked at the photograph of the clubhouse taken by people who'd been watching them from the shadows. He looked at Mercy. Mercy nodded once. He looked at Dutch. Dutch cracked his knuckles. I'll have 60 men operational by midnight. Deacon looked at Creed. Full mobilization, he said. Every chapter. Every member. No one rides alone. And Creed, when we find Griggs, and we will find him, he goes to law enforcement alive, conscious, and without a mark on him. That's not a request. That's the only condition that keeps this entire operation from becoming the story Linden uses to bury us. Understood. Now go. All of you. We've got 4 hours of daylight left and 7 children who need to be alive in the morning. Chairs scraped. Boots hit concrete. The back room emptied in 30 seconds. Creed was last out the door. Mercy caught his arm. One more thing, she said. She held up her phone. On the screen was an email header, a message sent from Victor Linden's personal assistant to a recipient address that Mercy had traced through 3 forwarding services to a prepaid email account registered at a public library in the next county. The subject line read, Accelerate Timeline, Priority Target, Mercer. The email was sent today. At 1:38 p.m., 14 minutes before Nolan Griggs appeared on Dalton Street. Creed stared at the screen. His face didn't change. His breathing didn't change. But somewhere behind the concrete exterior, in the place where the animal lived, a switch flipped. The kind that doesn't flip back. The kind that reclassifies a situation from problem to war and reallocates every resource accordingly. Linden ordered the hit on the Mercer house, he said. That's what the evidence suggests. Not a broken system, not negligence, a directive. Yes. Creed handed the phone back. Then we don't just find Griggs, he said. We bring them both down. He walked into the freezing night where 60 engines were about to come alive, and the city had no idea that the thunder rolling through its streets wasn't weather. It was judgment, wearing leather and chrome and the faces of men who had nothing left to lose except the promise they'd made to 7 children they'd never met. And that was the one promise not a single one of them was willing to break. At 11:47 p.m., Josiah's voice came through the radio. 2 words. Found him. And Creed Hollow, who had kept every shattered piece of himself under control for 48 hours through force of will and the memory of a 7-year-old's fingers wrapped around his, turned his Harley toward the address Josiah transmitted and rode through the frozen dark toward the abandoned cold storage warehouse on the industrial waterfront where Nolan Griggs sat in a room lit by a single battery-powered lantern, surrounded by maps and photographs and bus schedules, and a duffel bag packed with everything a man needs to make a child disappear. And on the prepaid phone beside him, a text message from a number he knew well. Get out. They're coming. But Griggs didn't run, because the second message, sent 30 seconds later from the same number, read, "Don't worry, Lyndon's lawyer filed the injunction at 9 p.m. By morning, every member of the Iron Saints MC will be served with a restraining order. They can't touch you. They can't come near the children. Finish what you started." And when Creed's headlight cut through the warehouse darkness at 11:53 p.m., and he saw Griggs standing in the center of the concrete floor with the lantern at his feet and the duffel bag over his shoulder and a smile on his face that said, "I've already won," Creed killed the engine. The silence was absolute. And he realized, with a clarity that felt like a blade pressed against the base of his skull, that the next 60 seconds would determine not just Ellie Mercer's life, not just the fate of the Iron Saints, not just his own freedom or his chance of ever hearing his daughter's voice again, but whether damaged men could still do undamaged things in a world that had rigged every system against them, and was betting, right now, tonight, in this warehouse, that they couldn't. Griggs tilted his head. "You can't touch me," he said. "And by morning, you can't come within 500 feet of any of them." Behind Creed, Josiah and Toll and 17 other riders stood in a silent half-circle, engines off, breath rising, waiting for the word that would define everything that came after. Creed reached into his cut pocket, not for a weapon, for his phone. And he dialed the one number he'd been saving, the number Mercy had given him 3 hours ago with the words, "Use this only when there's no other way." The direct line to a federal prosecutor named Catherine Voss, who had spent 6 years building a trafficking case against a network she could never quite identify. A case that was missing one thing: a witness, a location, and physical evidence connecting the network's operator to the children on the wall. The phone rang once, twice. "This is Voss. My name is Creed Hollow. I'm standing in a warehouse on the industrial waterfront with 18 witnesses, a suspect named Nolan Griggs holding a bag full of evidence, and a digital paper trail connecting him to a man named Victor Linden, who ordered the targeting of 7 children in this county. I need you here in 20 minutes, and I need you to bring everything you've got." Silence on the line, then, "Don't let him leave that building." Creed looked at Griggs. Griggs looked at 18 bikers who stood between him and every exit. Nobody moved, and the clock started. 20 minutes is a long time when you're standing in a frozen warehouse with 18 men and a predator who knows the law better than you do. Creed counted every second. Griggs hadn't moved. He stood in the center of the concrete floor with the duffel bag over his shoulder and the lantern at his feet, casting his shadow in 4 directions like a compass pointing nowhere. His smile hadn't changed. It was the smile of a man holding a card he believed was unbeatable: the restraining order, the legal machinery, the corporate armor of Victor Linden, and the system that had protected men like Griggs for longer than any of these bikers had been riding. "You're making a mistake," Griggs said. His voice echoed off the steel walls. "All of you. Every second you keep me here is unlawful detention. Every man in this room is looking at a felony charge. Your club, your bikes, your freedom, gone. Over what? A phone call to a prosecutor who can't get here fast enough to make any of this legal?" Nobody answered. The silence was a wall. 18 men breathing in the cold, their exhales rising in white columns under the fractured skylights, where moonlight cut through gaps in the corrugated roof and laid pale stripes across the floor, like the bars of a cage that hadn't decided who it was holding. Griggs shifted the duffel bag on his shoulder. Creed saw the movement. "Put the bag down," he said. "I'm leaving." "You're not. You can't hold me. You're not law enforcement. You're a convicted felon standing in a building you don't own with put the bag down." Griggs looked at the half-circle of bikers blocking every exit. He looked at Josiah, who stood at the main loading door with his arms crossed, and the absolute stillness of a man who had once spent 41 hours behind a scope without moving and could stand in this warehouse until the building rotted around him if that's what the situation required. He looked at Tull, who was shaking. Not from cold, not from fear, but from the effort of restraining something that lived in the same place it lived in Creed, the same place it lived in every man in this room who had ever been a child and had ever been failed by the people who were supposed to keep them safe. Griggs put the bag down. "Smart," Creed said. "This changes nothing. Lyndon's attorneys—" "Sit down. I don't take orders from—" Sit down, or I'll ask Josiah to help you sit down, and Josiah is less patient than I am. Griggs sat on the concrete. The lantern light hit his face from below, turning his features into a topography of shadows, hollow cheeks deeper, eye sockets darker, the trucker cap casting a rim of black across his forehead. He looked in that light exactly like what he was, a hollow thing wearing a human shape. They waited. At 12:09 a.m., the sound of tires on gravel reached the warehouse. Not one vehicle. 3. The first was a black SUV with federal plates. The second was an unmarked sedan. The third was a county sheriff's cruiser that Creed hadn't expected, and that made his stomach drop for 2 seconds before the doors opened and a woman stepped out who he recognized from the photograph Mercy had shown him. Catherine Voss was 47, compact, dressed in a dark overcoat, and moved with the economy of someone who had spent her career in rooms where hesitation was a liability. She crossed the warehouse floor without looking at the bikers, walked directly to the duffel bag, knelt beside it, and pulled on nitrile gloves. She opened the bag. Maps. Photographs. A laptop. 3 prepaid phones. A coil of rope. A roll of duct tape. 2 bottles of liquid that Creed didn't want to identify and didn't need to. And at the bottom, in a sealed plastic folder, a stack of printed documents bearing the Ethos Property Group letterhead and Victor Linden's signature. Voss looked up at Creed. Who found this location? My man Josiah. Tracked Griggs from the rail yard using traffic cameras that a friend at the city DOT accessed. Accessed how? He asked nicely. Voss didn't smile. She didn't frown. She looked at the contents of the bag with the expression of a surgeon opening a patient and finding exactly the pathology she'd spent 6 years trying to diagnose. Nolan Griggs, she said, turning to face him. I'm Federal Prosecutor Catherine Voss. You're being detained on active federal warrants in connection with the disappearance of 2 minors and the targeting of 7 additional minors in this county. You have the right to remain silent. Griggs said nothing. He looked at Creed, and for the first time the smile was gone, replaced by something older and colder. Not fear, but the sudden mechanical recalibration of a man who has just realized that the game he thought he was winning had been a different game entirely, played on a board he didn't know existed, and the pieces he thought were his had been moving against him since the moment a 7-year-old girl grabbed a biker's hand in a frozen park and said 3 words that set the whole thing in motion. Federal agents cuffed him on the warehouse floor. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut echoed off the steel walls, and Creed felt something release in his chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, but the slow, painful decompression of a man who has been holding his breath for 3 days and has forgotten how to exhale without it hurting. Voss approached him while her team processed the scene. The Ethos documents in that bag, she said. If they're authentic, they connect Victor Linden directly to the placement of unchecked workers in facilities serving minors. Combined with the digital communications your legal contact provided, which I'll need to discuss sourcing on, formally and soon, this gives me enough for a warrant on Linden's offices, his servers, and his personal residence. How soon? I'll have a judge's signature by 6 a.m. And the other children? The ones on the corkboard who haven't been identified? If Linden's servers contain what I think they contain, we'll have names, locations, and a full map of every placement made through Community First staffing in the last 3 years. She paused. Mr. Hollow, what your club did tonight, the surveillance, the protection details, the evidence preservation, none of it followed procedure. None of it will be easy to untangle in court. Defense attorneys will challenge every link in this chain. I know. But the physical evidence in that bag was in plain sight in an abandoned building. The federal warrants on Griggs were active and valid, and the digital trail from Ethos was obtained through a Labor Department inquiry that I can reconstruct through proper channels, now that I know where to look. She met his eyes. You didn't build a court case tonight. You built a map. And I know how to follow maps. Creed nodded. He turned to walk away. Mr. Hollow, he stopped. The 2 children in the Midwest, Kayla Bennett and Marcus Rivera, ages 6 and 8 when they disappeared. He didn't turn around. If what's on Linden's servers is what I think it is, we may finally find out what happened to them. Creed's shoulders moved, not a shrug, not a flinch. Something between the two. The involuntary response of a body processing information that is simultaneously the best and worst thing it has ever heard. He walked out of the warehouse. The night air hit him like cold water. 18 Harleys sat in a silent row along the waterfront, chrome reflecting the distant glow of the city skyline. Josiah was leaning against his bike with a cigarette, Toll beside him, both men looking at Creed the way soldiers look at each other after an operation. Not with triumph, not with relief, but with the quiet, exhausted recognition that they'd all survived something that could have ended differently. "It's done?" Toll asked. "Griggs is in federal custody. Voss is moving on Linden at dawn. And the kids? Safe. For now. For real this time." Toll nodded. He looked down at his boots. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, and he didn't try to hide it, because in this brotherhood, among these men, tears were not weakness. Tears were evidence that the machinery inside you still worked, that the war hadn't killed the part of you that cared, even when caring was the most dangerous thing you could do. "I'm going home to hold my daughter," Toll said. "Go." Toll kicked his bike to life and rode into the dark. One by one, the others followed. Engines starting in sequence, headlights cutting through the warehouse district like searchlights sweeping a battlefield after the guns have stopped. Each rider peeled away into the frozen city, carrying with him the particular weight of what they'd done and what they'd almost done and the thin, trembling line between the two. Josiah was last. He stood beside Creed for a full minute without speaking. "You didn't hit him," Josiah said finally. "No." "In the hallway. At the Mercer house. When he was standing outside her door. You didn't hit him." "No." "How?" Creed looked at the river. The water was black and slow, carrying fragments of ice toward the sea with the patience of something that had been doing the same thing for 10,000 years and would continue for 10,000 more, regardless of what happened on its banks. "Because Ellie was on the other side of that door," he said. "And the thing I wanted to do to Griggs would have made me the thing she was afraid of. I couldn't be that. Not for her." Josiah nodded. He mounted his bike, kicked the engine over, and rode away without another word. Creed stood alone on the waterfront. The city hummed in the distance. Sirens somewhere. The deep bass of a freight train crossing the river bridge. The sound of Josiah's Harley fading into the grid of streets and avenues until it was indistinguishable from the city's own heartbeat. He sat on his bike for a long time. Then he rode to the Mercer house. It was after 2 a.m. when he pulled onto Dalton Street. 2 Iron Saints riders sat in a truck on the cross street. The replacement's deacon had personally selected, men with clean records and steady hands. They nodded at Creed as he passed. He killed the engine in the driveway and sat in the dark. The porch light was on. It hadn't been on before. Someone had replaced the bulb.